Well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you all for joining us for this installment of the Preserving American Liberty and Freedom Lecture Series. Thank you especially to Keith Work for his support of YAF in tonight's event. Tonight I have the great honor of introducing to you Colonel Allen West. A decorated combat veteran and constitutional conservative, Colonel West served 22 years in the U.S. Army, earning numerous honors including the Bronze Star. He later represented Florida's 22nd District in U.S. Congress, serving on both the Armed Services and Small Business Committees. He's led key policy organizations and served as chairman of the Republican Party of Dallas. And he currently serves as the chairman of the Dallas County Republican Party. So please give a warm welcome to Colonel West.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with each and every one of you. Now, let me tell you what frustration is. You know, in the military, you're raised with the understanding that early is on time. And so I live in Garland. So I left Garland at 4 o'clock because I knew I wanted to be here and beat the traffic and everything. I was stuck in traffic for an hour and a half, a quarter of a mile away from here on Loop 12. I was looking at the campus for 90 minutes and could not move. You want to talk about frustration because I'm in the express lane, so guess what? You can't go anywhere. But I did finally get here at about 6:10, and it's a pleasure and honor. This is the easiest YAF trip I ever had to make because I just got in my car and drove over here. Didn't have to catch a plane, didn't have to stay in a hotel. I get to go home, sleep in my own bed. And this is my 4th time being here on the campus of the University of Dallas. As a matter of fact, Elena Blake, she had me here the first time. We talked about government and civics and things of that nature. Then I was a board member for the National Rifle Association. Remember, we had the big discussion about campus carry, and I was invited to come over here and speak for that. And then my daughter, who went to Dallas Christian, they played you guys in volleyball. Of course, y'all whipped them bad. It was not even pretty. And now I'm here once again. But before I get started, and I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then I want to hear what's on your minds because, you know, this is not a lecture. This is me sharing my thoughts, my perspectives, my insights, my experiences with you because once upon a time, you know, I was 18. It's hard to believe. Let me tell you what I got in the mail just last week. I got my Medicare insurance card. Okay, so I once was a college student. I can't remember when, but so much happened when I was in college that affected me. But I want to highlight Angela and where did Liam go? Where did he escape to? Liam, get back in here. But anyhow, this is how great YAF is, the Young America's Foundation. We started a program where we selected 25 of the campus leaders, and we took them over to Normandy for 4 days. They got to walk the beaches. They got to walk the drop zones. They even got to see a dummy like me still jumping out of airplanes. And I jumped out of a World War II vintage C-47 onto a drop zone that the 101st Pathfinders dropped into 81 years ago. And see, that's the importance of coming out here and sharing with each and every one of you, because you've got to understand the uniqueness of the country that you live in. You've got to understand the service and the sacrifice and commitments of so many people that have gone before you. And we got to connect you to that, because for some odd reason, there's so many people out there saying some very hurtful things about this great nation. And it means a lot to me because my dad served in World War II. And my older brother served in Vietnam, and my dad challenged me to be an Army officer when I was just 15. And so that kind of leads me to where I want to jump off and start. 1979 to 1983, that's when I attended the University of Tennessee. And if you had told me when I was sitting there at the University of Tennessee in 1979, when the Soviet Union invaded a country called Afghanistan, that I would spend 2.5 years of my life there, I would say, where? If you would have told me that, you know, after the Iranian hostage crisis, that I would serve in combat in the country that was right next door to Iran in Iraq, I said, you gotta be kidding me. If you had told me in 1979 to 1983 that I would go behind the Iron Curtain, and so many young people don't even know what the Iron Curtain is, but I actually have been to East Germany. I walked the streets of East Berlin, side by side with Soviet military officers. I was there and I saw the East German Stasi secret police. I went into government-run department stores and grocery stores. I saw what rent control, government control housing looked like. It's not nice. I saw what it looks like when the government tells you what type of car you can drive. And oh, by the way, you had two choices, a two-door or a four-door, and three ugly colors. I saw buildings that still had bullet holes in it from World War II. I saw the streets that had potholes. But the most important thing is that I saw people that didn't smile. They didn't even want to look at you for fear of being picked up by the Stasi police and being taken away because maybe they were trying to coordinate being snuck back through this little thing called Checkpoint Charlie. And that happened for me not once but twice, 1985, 1986, when I was stationed over in Europe. And I said, I never want to see that come to my country. But slowly but surely, because we are not connecting to our history, because we're not connecting to our past, we're not talking about our founding documents, and I don't care if you're black, white, Hispanic, Asian, green, purple, whatever. There is no other nation that could say to a young man born 65 some odd years ago in a segregated blacks only hospital that your dad was just a corporal in a segregated army in World War II, but you would be a lieutenant colonel and command 600 troops in combat. That you would grow up at the age of 50, you would be a congressional representative of a congressional district that when you were born, you could not even walk on those beaches in Fort Lauderdale. And oh, by the way, the highest per capita income zip code was part of the congressional district that I represented, Palm Beach Island. And if you know a little thing about Palm Beach Island, there's a little teeny house there that was in the district that I had the honor to represent, a house called Mar-a-Lago.
It's only worth $13 million.
Yeah, just a little something, just a drop in. But my point is that how is it that we live in such a horrible country, but yet a kid born in a blacks-only hospital in 1961 in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia, grew up in the same neighborhood that produced Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., can be standing here before you today as a retired Army lieutenant colonel, a former member of the United States House of Representatives, the former chairman of the largest Republican Party, state Republican Party in the country. That's why I get out with YAF and talk to each and every one of you about what America means to me and what America should mean to each and every one of us. And if there's one thing that I want the young people, maybe some of us old heads here, to remember is that free does not equal freedom. I saw when people said that we can make things affordable for you in East Berlin. That means you lose your freedom. So I want you to think about that. Now, let's unpack some of the things, because Liam asked me to talk about some of the national security things that we're facing right now. And so I would like to try to start with some of the things that are going on currently that are in your heads. And of course, like I said, we're going to have a good question and answer period, about 30 to 45 minutes. Let's talk about this whole thing about what's going on in the Caribbean. Because it's pretty funny to me when I hear people saying that we're out there shooting fishing boats. I never realized that fishing boats could go 180 miles per hour. But this is some of the absurdities out there. You have to understand in the law of land warfare, there are two types of people on a battlefield. There are lawful combatants and there are unlawful combatants. The law of land warfare protects lawful combatants. And what do I mean by a lawful combatant? I mean someone that is a declared representative of a state, a nation state, an understood nation state that wears a uniform, as opposed to a non-state, non-uniform belligerent. Those are unlawful combatants. Unlawful combatants do not have protections in the law of land warfare. Today we call unlawful combatants, we call them terrorists. They're people that don't wear a uniform. They're people that blend into society, but they still are out there carrying out heinous acts and acts of terrorism, acts of combat against civilians mostly, and also against uniformed personnel. So the issue that we have right now is that how do we deal with these people that are trying to exploit our system of rights and freedoms and liberties and claiming that they have the exact same rights and freedoms and liberties, but they really and truthfully don't, because they're not even citizens of this country. You go back to the 14th Amendment. Everyone always talks about the 14th Amendment, the equal protection under the law clause. What was the purpose of the 14th Amendment? See, the 13th Amendment, coming out of the Abraham Lincoln administration, the 13th Amendment was all about freeing the slaves. But that wasn't just good enough. The 14th Amendment had to then say, these people that we just freed are now citizens. And because they are citizens, they now have the equal protection under the law. And the 15th Amendment then came along and gave them the opportunity to vote. Of course, back then it was just all males. I think it's the 21st Amendment that changed, gave women the right to vote. But the 14th Amendment should not be applicable to people that are in your country or people that are engaging against your country illegally. Title 18, U.S. Code 1325. It is a federal offense to enter into the United States of America without authorization. First time you do it, it's a misdemeanor. Anytime after that, it's a felony with sentences to jail. So I think it's really important that we have to start understanding what it means to be in a country illegally, because lots of times people talk about immigrants. And look, I married an immigrant. My wife is originally from Jamaica. And I remember when I drove her down to Kansas City, we were married, and she finally got her full U.S. citizenship. She cried on that day when she got her full U.S. citizenship. Her dad, came here from Jamaica, and, he wanted to get a free haircut. And the next thing you know, he ended up at Fort Dix, New Jersey. And he spent 27 years in the United States Army, 2 combat tours in Vietnam. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. That's the legal way to do it. We have a legal path to citizenship, a legal path of being a person here in this country. But if you're doing it illegally, number one, you're violating the laws of this country. Then think about what has happened now. You just recently had an Afghan national over here in Fort Worth saying that he was on ticket. He's going to build a bomb and blow up a building in Fort Worth. And again, I was in Afghanistan for 2.5 years. Several of my interpreter translators, we properly vetted. We took them through the process, and they're here living in the United States of America, enjoying all the rights and freedoms, raising their kids. As a matter of fact, one of my interpreter translators, he stopped off and lived in Georgia for a while. His young son was a Georgia Bulldogs fan. But the important thing is that we have to have people that respect our national sovereignty. We have to have people that respect our rule of law. If they don't respect our rule of law, they should not be afforded the same rights and freedoms that an American citizen or someone that is here legally is afforded. So when you think about Trinidad, which freely operates right here in Dallas County, when you think about Islamic terrorists that have come across into this country, these are unlawful combatants, and we have to deal with them in a certain way, just the same as these narco-terrorists, transnational narco-criminal terrorists that are trying to bring in drugs into the United States of America. Here's a number. If you want to see the gravity of the situation, you can write this down. In the past 4 years, the United States of America has lost 250,000 plus people just to fentanyl. 250,000 plus, just the fentanyl. Now, how many did we lose in the entire Korean War? 37,000. How many did we lose in the entire Vietnam War? 55,000. So I want you to put that number in comparison to what I just gave you. 250,000 of Americans, many of them young people like you, have died because of narco-terrorists, unlawful combatants who are bringing in a weapon of mass destruction. That's what fentanyl is. Fentanyl is produced, manufactured in China. The ingredients are brought over here. These narco-terrorists, they refine it, and then it comes into the United States of America with one single intent and purpose: to kill you. That's why they're unlawful combatants. And that's why they're not afforded protections. I mean, if someone was transiting a nuclear bomb, what would you do? So we have to be very understanding about what is happening. Now, let me talk to you about the Middle East. How many people here have ever been to the Middle East? Okay. A very unique situation. And I want to tell you that it's rooted in history. When I hear young people out there saying, free, free Palestine, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And of course, maybe you've seen some of those interviews where people go up and say, which river and what sea? And then you get the deer in the headlights look. See, that's why it's so important, as the Bible would say, study to show thyself approved. You got to read. It's not just the formal education you get in the walls of a university. It's also an informal education, such as what we're talking about tonight. Where did the word Palestine come from? Okay? Well, I'm going to answer it. I'm sure you got it. But you've got to go all the way back to the Simon Bar Kokhba revolt against the Roman Empire, 132 to 135 AD. Emperor Hadrian was in charge of the Roman Empire at the time. The Romans got tired of these people, the Jewish people, causing up a bunch of mess down in this area called Judea. So they put the full might of the Roman Empire against them to crush them. They wanted them to understand that they saw that Judaism was the root cause of them consistently revolting against them. I think the Simon Bar Kokhba revolt was like the third Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire. So once they defeated the Jewish people in the Simon Bar Kokhba revolt, Emperor Hadrian sent out these two decrees. Number one, Jerusalem would be renamed to Aelia Capitolina. And the entire region that was called Judea would be renamed to Syriac Palestina, Palaestinia. Now, the root word of Palestina goes back to Philistia. Because what Emperor Hadrian really was seeking to do was to poke the Jewish people in the chest by renaming their land after their ancient enemies, the Philistines. Remember that big guy, Goliath and David with the little stones? That was their ancient enemy. But when you go back and you study, okay, who are the Philistines? The Philistines were not indigenous people to that region. The Philistines traced their ancestry back to Greece. So when you talk about freeing Palestine, you're actually saying that we're going to restore it back to the people that it was taken from originally. But how many folks here ever heard of Yasser Arafat? Yasser Arafat, who created the Palestinian Liberation Organization, one of the early Islamic terrorist organizations. If you don't recall, I do recall. I think it was the 1972 Olympics in Munich when the PLO took Jewish athletes hostage and murdered them. And I looked at my dad and said, "What's going on? Why did they stop the Olympics?" See, Yasser Arafat, very brilliantly so, decided if we wanted to turn the tide against the Jewish people in the Middle East, he would associate Arabs to the word Palestine. And so in the 1960s, that was the first time you ever heard the term Palestinian. Prior to that, you never heard the word Palestinian. As a matter of fact, if you go back after World War II, any and everyone that lived in that region, the British gave them a passport that said Palestine, Jew, Arab, whomever. But truthfully, it comes back to what Emperor Hadrian did in decreeing that land as such. But what people have failed to do is to study to understand exactly where that came from. And so now it's been propagandized, it's been manipulated. So people want to create something history has never had. There's never been a kingdom. There's never been a king, a queen, a satrap, a prince, nothing of a place called Palestine. It's a region. And as a matter of fact, the French and Italian sea merchants also called the exact same region the Levant. And what does Levant mean? Levant means rises from the sea. Because if you're ever coming into the coast of Israel and coming into that region, coming into Tel Aviv across the Mediterranean, it looks like the mountains are right there on the water. And that's what Levant means, rises from the sea. Now, why don't we say Levantinians? Actually, the only people that ever used that was ISIS. If you go back, you remember they used to call themselves the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and they also call themselves ISIL, the Islamic State in the Levant. See, that's why we have to be very smart and study these things and understand these things, and don't just get caught up in some trend that is going on. If we fail to realize that Hamas, and let me be real, Hamas is not going anywhere, okay? If you have never read Hamas's charter, you should read Hamas's charter. Hamas's charter calls for the eradication and elimination and destruction of not only the state of Israel, but Jews worldwide. That's who they are. Same with Hezbollah. And I remember being a kid and watching the Ayatollah Khomeini coming into power. And this is exactly what the result has been, a resurgence of Islamic terrorism, Islamic jihadism, Islamofascism, which has brought itself here into the United States of America. The largest Islamic terrorist funding case in U.S. history was out of Texas. 2008, Holy Land Foundation trial where groups were raising money to send to Hamas. So this is right here in your backyard. So I want you to be aware of that. And again, this is not about hating anybody, but this is about understanding history, understanding philosophies, understanding ideologies, understanding belief systems. Because really and truthfully in the United States of America, this is no longer about Republican or Democrat. Just throw that aside. America was founded on a belief that the individual is sovereign. And why do we say that the individual is sovereign in the United States of America? Because America is the embodiment of John Locke and natural rights theory. This really is. And if you don't know natural rights theory, do we have a political science professor or someone in here? 1689, two treatises of government. You should go back and check that out. Life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson changed to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But when no other nation, this is what we celebrate next year, 250 years, no other nation was founded on a premise that the individual is sovereign because your rights come from a sovereign God. That's what you're endowed by. And right now, what we are facing is a belief that says, nah, your rights don't come from a sovereign God with a big G. It comes from government. Don't believe me? Go back to September. Senator Tim Kaine, who was that close to being the vice president of the United States of America back in 2004, 2016. And also, he was the former governor of the state of Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia, the place that gave us Thomas Jefferson, the place that gave us Madison, the writers of the Declaration, the writers of the United States Constitution. Tim Kaine stated that our rights don't come from a creator God. They come from government. That's a sitting United States senator that said that. See, that's the problem that we have here in our country. And if we don't understand what formulates us here as an American people, then we don't understand how important it is. And then we allow people to come in here illegally and usurp those rights and freedoms and liberties. Because I would have never thought that I'd see a day when law enforcement is being attacked for enforcing the law. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says there are two things that the federal government is supposed to guarantee to every state in the union. It's called a guarantee clause. Number one, a Republican form of government, not party, Republican form of government, because America is a constitutional republic. The second thing is to protect every state in the union from invasion. But that's what we have going on right now. Now, let me flip over to another little thing that we need to discuss. So let me close out on this. If Israel goes, that's the canary in the coal mine. Because then the sights will be turned on us. That's what you're facing. And it really troubles me when I see young people on college and university campuses that are going out there and supporting Islamic terrorist organizations that, oh, by the way, on October 7th of 2023, kill young people at a peace concert and rape young women, then kill them. So we got to have these discussions. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is who is our number one geopolitical foe? Who is behind a lot of the mess that's going on right now in the entire world? Who do you think? Absolutely. China. And they say so. And let me tell you what China realized. China realized that the Soviet Union, how many people here remember when the Soviet Union collapsed? The Soviet Union did not collapse militarily. I'd like to take credit for that since I was stationed overseas, but no, the Soviet Union did not collapse militarily. The Soviet Union collapsed economically. Because a socialist, centralized, government-controlled economic system cannot keep up with a free market economic system. A system that believes in wealth redistribution, a system that believes in nationalizing economic production, a system that believes in creating and expanding welfare state, a system that believes in social egalitarianism, they call it equity, and a system that is rooted in secular humanism cannot stand up to a free market system. And that's why it collapsed. But what did China see? China said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to still be communists, but we're going to get out here and be a part of the World Economic Community. And in 1986, when we granted most favored trade nation status to China, that set us on the path that we are today. Let me give you a great example. 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, China had 0 aircraft carriers. How many aircraft carriers does China have today?
1.5.
3. China has 3 aircraft carriers. Now, you know, the Army-Navy game is coming up, and it's a big deal for us Army guys. So this is really going to hurt me when I say this. The means by which you extend a nation's hegemonic dominance and power is not through an army. If that were the case, the Spartans would have whipped the Athenians. The means by which you establish hegemonic dominance is through a naval force. And the last time we saw an Asian nation invest heavily in their maritime force, I think we all know what happened. And that's the path we're on right now. And let me give you the comparison. During the Reagan administration, our United States Navy had about 535 surface naval ships. What do you think the United States Navy has today, surface warships? Less than 300. But China's going this way. Read the One Belt, One Road strategy. But what China has done, and you think about it, we are, much like the Romans, we are outsourcing so much of our production and manufacturing over to China because we got hooked on what? Cheap goods. And they're taking that and using that to their advantage to build themselves up militarily. See, there are no North Korean troops fighting with Russia in the Ukraine if it weren't for China supporting those North Korean troops. Russia is not probably fighting in Ukraine if it weren't for China helping them by buying a lot of their natural gas, which is another key important part of your national security and your economic security, is your energy security. Why did Japan get kind of pissed off at us to start off World War II? Because we cut off oil shipments to Japan. That's a huge point to leverage. So China is going to continue to do what is necessary. The COVID issue was all about China. And think about how many millions did they cause to lose their lives. And this was not something that came from a little rodent or whatever they said. This was something that was planned. And they brought it into the United States of America. So we got to be very careful about how we see China and how they affect Russia, to North Korea, to Iran. This is the new axis of evil. But also, we've got to be concerned about, remember how it started out with the unlawful combatants that are out there, being Islamic terrorists and also narco terrorists. Once upon a time, there were direct flights that would take you from Caracas, Venezuela to Tehran, Iran. Hugo Chavez and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad were very, very good friends, very close. And Russia, China, and Iran have really been propping up Venezuela for quite some time, especially doing what? Buying their oil. You want to talk about Venezuela? Wasn't too long ago, Venezuela was one of the most prosperous nations in our hemisphere. But when you talk about wealth redistribution, you talk about nationalizing economic production, the government took over the oil and gas industry. What was once one of the most prosperous nations, recently you had people going into zoos to try to kill animals to get something to eat. And I'm not making that up. So how do I wrap this up? How do I close this off? What do I want to say? I want you to be more circumspect. I want you to be more aware of the things that are going on. Like I said, in 1979, I couldn't have pointed out Afghanistan on the map, but I spent 2.5 years there. I couldn't have told you about, too much about the history of Iran or Iraq or Iran, but I ended up being there. As a matter of fact, 1 month before I went on the active duty in the United States Army in November of 1983, October the 23rd of 1983, over 200 some odd United States Marines, soldiers and sailors were killed in the Beirut bombings attack because of what group? Hezbollah. And who sponsored Hezbollah to do that attack? Iran. And what are we still dealing with today? Hezbollah and Iran. So I want to see a time when maybe one of you can come back to here, your alma mater, University of Dallas, UD, and you can say, we fixed this. We don't have to worry about the threats from a China or Russia, Iran or North Korea or unlawful combatants. We fixed this. And that we went back and we reconnected with our legacy, our heritage as an American people. We fixed this. We understood what type of philosophy of governance that has caused us to be the greatest nation that the world has ever known. 250 years. April the 19th of 1775. The shot that was fired that was heard around the world. This kid that was born in a blacks-only hospital 65 years ago was at Lexington, Massachusetts on April the 19th of 2025 to watch the 250th reenactment of 77 men who stood against 1,000 British redcoats. And they said, no, we're not going to surrender. That's why you're here in this nation right now. And if we ever forget that piece of history, and some people say, well, Colonel, I mean, you're a black guy. Why should you care? I mean, y'all seen that movie Glory? I mean, y'all, Denzel Washington, I know y'all love Denzel, Morgan Freeman and everybody. Denzel won an Academy Award. That's my legacy. The first black men to wear the uniform of the United States of America officially, the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. That enabled my dad to wear a uniform. That enabled my father-in-law to wear a uniform. That enabled my older brother to wear a uniform. That enabled my godfather, William Sticky Jackson, a Tuskegee Airman, to wear the uniform. That enabled me to wear a uniform. That enabled my nephew to wear a uniform. There's always been men and women who have stood in the gap, and they have passed on a great beacon of liberty and freedom to a subsequent generation. And I got to tell you, my generation is almost letting y'all down. But as long as I have oxygen in my lungs, it ain't happening. And that's why I'm here at University of Dallas. That's why I'll continue to take young people over to Normandy to walk the beaches of Omaha, Utah, stand on those drop zones to know what Americans did, not just for this country, but for others. So God bless you all. What are your questions?